Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about 5 things that you need to know before you move to Norfolk, Virginia, or buy a house in Norfolk. And we're starting right now. Hey, my name is Sam Santalone, and I'm a real estate agent in the Hampton Roads area. And that goes from Virginia Beach through Williamsburg, and I do videos every week about living and moving to the area. So today we're going to be talking about some things that I think are very important if you plan to move to Norfolk, Virginia. Now, and especially if you're buying a house in Norfolk, because Norfolk is a little bit different than other cities in Hampton Roads, but it has a lot of positives, some drawbacks. I definitely think you need to kind of weigh those things out, and that's why I want to talk about these 5 things now, so you can make some decisions before you plan to move. So number 1 is going to be that Norfolk has different vibes in different parts of the area, but those vibes can change very quickly in certain parts of the city as well. So the idea of Norfolk is that it's an old city, and that's great. It has some nice character to it, and people love Norfolk for the character. Nice old houses, Victorian craftsman style houses, 1920s, 1930s, and anywhere in that range, right? And so that, in addition to that, you also have things to do. Downtown Norfolk, again, is awesome. Walkable shops, the restaurants, the bars, the things that make an evening and nightlife very vibrant is in Ghent and also in downtown Norfolk. It has the largest downtown anywhere in Hampton Roads. That is what people often want to come to Norfolk or to be around it for. Now, that being said, Norfolk being a large city in land size, it's more than just Ghent and downtown Norfolk. The reason I say that is that as you drive no more than half a mile, 2 miles or more away from downtown Norfolk or Ghent, for example, you'll find that there are totally different parts of town. So I'll show you on the map what I'm talking about. So if you come away, zoom out, there's Norfolk here, and Virginia Beach is just to the east of it. So we're here near the Elizabeth River and Lafayette River. Well, if you see on the west side, you'll see Ghent down here in the southwestern part of town. And next to that is downtown Norfolk. But then as you go further north, you've got Larchmont and Edgewater, which is a very high character type of part of town as well as the further north here, Algonquin, North Meadowbrook, and also Lock Haven on the northwestern corner. This whole section is lots of character, lots of nice houses, and also shops and like cool restaurants and breweries and just things to do are all along this western side. But it's not all like that, even on the western side. So you could drive from parts of Ghent and West Ghent and get up into different parts of the center part of Norfolk, and it feels totally different. I'm not saying that you shouldn't live there or whatever. It's just the thing is, though, as you go through this part of town, the vibe does change. And so you'll find parts of town that are maybe a little bit more run down than, as you go several blocks west or east, So this is important because especially if you are buying from another state and you're trying to make a decision as to a house to buy, don't just rely on pictures online to determine if it's going to be a spot you're going to like, because the houses might look awesome in pictures, but the neighborhood might not be what you're expecting. It might be totally fine, but it might not be. And so that's why it's important to talk to your real estate agent, make sure that they give a nice tour, video of the area around the house, because you might decide that based on the house, you might like it, but based on the specific location, you might not feel as excited about it anymore. And then as you go further east from Ghent and downtown Norfolk, you've got Granby Street, which is a very awesome spot, which is close to more restaurants and more character neighborhoods like Talbot Park and Cromwell Farms. I love that part of the area. But as you go further east from there, Tidewater Drive is a very important road, because just west of there, you'll see totally different neighborhoods as to the east of there. So places like Lakewood, places like Lafayette and Winona, that side on one side can feel totally different as opposed to the other side of Tidewater Drive, or going further south. So you'll notice that there are different pockets that can feel totally different. And this is very important if you are planning to move here and you've not been here before. And then going further east from there is just kind of the blah part of Norfolk. It's like, 50s, 60s houses and kind of old rundown strip malls, and it's fine. It's just nothing fancy, and again, totally different than other parts of Norfolk. But then as you go further from there, another half a mile to a mile, you'll find some awesome tucked away neighborhoods that you would never have thought existed based on driving down the main parts of the streets closer to it. So while it's all an old neighborhood, there are different pockets that can feel different. And I think it's very important to know this before you plan to move to Norfolk, because you might decide you might want to pivot to a different city in Hampton Roads as opposed to living in Norfolk itself. So that leads me to number 2, which is if you want to be close to the action, close to the restaurants, close to the shops, and even close to walkable things, be as close as you can to downtown Norfolk, West Freemason, or Ghent as possible. But that does not mean you need to be in a place that you're able to walk from place to place to get around. Just because you have to drive to Ghent or drive to downtown Norfolk or West Freemason or West Ghent doesn't mean that you're in a real far away or a problem spot. It's still neighborhood sensitive, so be aware of the fact that, again, those neighborhoods can change, but it's more of as close as you can to be in those spots, I would say, is going to really help you feel that in that culture and that atmosphere that you might really like when you choose Norfolk. Now, number 3 is an interesting one because I don't think people realize this until they get into a house, which is these houses being old, they're often built with cast iron pipes, cast iron sewer or water lines. This is important because as the houses age, a lot of these houses having cast iron pipe under the house, they're prone to breaking down. These pipes are decades old, 60, 70, 80 plus years old. And so over time, you don't realize this before you move in, but these houses having these old components, they will eventually break down if they've not been replaced already. So what happens is if you do move in, you may have to replace these things over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years or whatever. And it can be $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 or more to replace these lines. And the lines go from the house to the street. That can be expensive. It can tear up your yard, the whole thing. Now, the reality is that's part of living in Norfolk or in a lot of parts of Hampton Roads. These houses are old, and that's what they did back then to put sewer lines and water lines underground to the street. But you can replace these. You can put PVC, for example, in to replace cast iron pipe. Now, again, it's expensive, but if you don't want to deal with the frustration of not having water or sewer for, a week or 2 weeks and scheduling the repair when it happens, you can do this ahead of time and it could save you some heartache. It can still be expensive. So this is not to say that if you buy a house in Norfolk, you've got to then replace your sewer line or water lines. But it definitely means you need to be aware that this is something that is very common in Norfolk. And if it hasn't been replaced, you need to budget ahead of time for this to be replaced in the next several years. But you just don't know. And so that's the thing about these cast iron pipes is that you don't know when they're going to break down. You just know that eventually they will. So that goes to the number 4, which is flooding. And I've talked about this in a lot of videos, but flooding is a thing in Norfolk. It's one of the spots that I'm most concerned about for flooding anywhere in Hampton Roads, especially on the western side. And if you're talking about the western side, we're talking about even near Ghent in very specific intersections through Ghent, in roadways, downtown Norfolk in parts, closer to West Freemason and The Hague, going up further north, going towards Colonial Place. There's some spots. It's very spotty as far as the worst of the flooding, but really the idea is if you're close to water in Norfolk, Elizabeth River, Lafayette River, some creeks and some waterways, even north towards Ocean View and Little Creek, be prepared for flooding. And what does that mean? I've said this before. The idea here is with flooding, it's not necessarily the water is going to get into your house, but you will have likely some issues parking your car, especially if you're in a low-lying area or you don't have a driveway to drive up into off of the road. So intersections can become problematic. Just where you park your car is probably the most important thing. But that being said, in addition to that, basements. This area has more basements, especially on the western side of the city, and so those can often have water that can flow into it. It's very common to have sump pumps in Norfolk in those basements, and you can do things to kind of offset the water intrusion, but just know that this is very normal. You don't have to necessarily be afraid of it, but definitely be aware of it, and so there are different levels of concern that you might need to have based on which house and which neighborhood you pick and which street even that you might pick in Norfolk. Now, this leads me to number 5, which is an interesting one, which is not all square footage is created equally in Norfolk. So these houses in Norfolk, because they're so old, you got some that are massive. You got 4, 5, 6 bedroom houses, 3,000 plus square feet, big rooms, wide open spaces. Then these houses were designed for the floor plans that people thought were functional back in the 20s, back in the 30s, which still can be helpful today. But you've got stuff like less closet space, which can be a thing. I've seen people a lot of times change and convert a bedroom, and use it as like a primary bedroom closet. So you've got weird configurations in some spots, but the most frustrating thing to me, and I think this is, again, something that's worth noting if you're planning to move here for the first time and have not had this experience before, which is there are a lot of Cape Cod style houses in Norfolk. Now, what is a Cape Cod style? It's kind of like when you look at a house and you see almost like a triangle pitched roof. It's just, you stare at it and it kind of goes up and then back down on the other side. This is a Cape Cod style. And what happens is you'll have a first floor that kind of feels like normal. But then you'll have steps that goes up to the second floor, and the roof lines of a lot of these houses are such that it doesn't feel like you have a full room. But a lot of these are technically actual square footage that they can count towards the square feet. So if you see online, you might see a house that's 2,000 square feet. But if it's a Cape Cod style, you might want to look first to determine if that 2,000 square feet really feels like 2,000 square feet, or you've got maybe 2 bedrooms on the second floor that feel kind of crammed. So not every 2,000 square foot or 2,500 square foot house or whatever will feel the same, especially with these Cape Cod style houses and roof lines. So if you have any more questions about relocating to Norfolk, buying a house in Norfolk, or anywhere else in Hampton Roads, that's what I do. I love helping people relocate to this area. So if you have any questions, please reach out. I have my contact information in the description. You can comment as well. You can reach out at any point, and I'll do whatever I can to help you relocate to the area. And I will see you on the next video.